Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's FP Virtual Dialogue, Defending Democracy, Safeguarding Global Elections in 2024, where we'll look at the methods and strategies for protecting electoral integrity and enhancing public confidence and trust in elections in 2024 and beyond. My name is Allison Carlson. I'm the Executive Vice President here at Foreign Policy, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be your moderator today. As you all know, 2024 is a pivotal year for elections around the world, with nearly half of the global community expected to participate in the voting process. Authoritarian governments are increasingly seeking to undermine these elections to ensure political power. We're witnessing governments around the world utilizing multi-pronged approaches to destabilize their elections and strip citizens of voting power. And they're doing this through different methods by weaponizing the information landscape, restricting the pre-election process, and manipulating or contesting the results. Authoritarian governments across the globe are working to subvert the democratic process. But acknowledging this, and acknowledging these barriers, international organizations and citizen election observers, our political leaders themselves, and election commissions are really pushing back to promote electoral integrity and enhance public confidence in elections. And they're doing so through multiple tools, utilizing new technologies, independent verification systems, and more. And these are the kind of game changers that we'll be talking about today, that will really protect integrity, increase trust, and promote the acceptance of credible elections and enhance public confidence. So it's against this backdrop and in this incredibly big year for elections around the world that we've gathered a group of experts to further explore these issues, the risks, the opportunities, and what we must all do together to enhance electoral integrity around the world. But before diving in, I'd first like to give a big thanks to NDI for helping us make this event possible. And also, while I have a lot of questions for our participants today, we also want to hear from you. We have over 1,000 viewers joining in from around the world, and we want you to input your questions, and please let us know what you would like to hear and what you would like to learn from our speakers. So just a few housekeeping notes here before we get started. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so. If you're online on our website and watching the stream there, please click the button to submit your questions. If you do so, please submit your name, your organization, and where you're writing from. If you're looking on social media, you can also chime in on social media as well. We want to hear from everyone as much as possible from around the world. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'm absolutely honored to begin our conversation today with Her Excellency Dr. Joyce Banda, the former president of the Republic of Malawi. Welcome, President Banda. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's dive in. I mean, you heard the introduction, and you have been working in Malawi and around the world as part of international organizations and in positions of leadership, really observing what's happening with our electoral process. In the last several months, there have been so many stories across media and the news about concerns about elections, Senegal being one of them, for example, with the canceling of elections and concerns about the electoral integrity and how elections there and elsewhere across the continent and around the world will unfold. And so I'd like to kick off our conversation by asking you, when you're witnessing some of these trends and when we have this setup and this framework of, a battle between democracy and autocracy, and this being a make or break year for democracy and electoral integrity, what is front of mind for you? And what are some of the concerns that you're thinking about?
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be part of this conversation. And I want to first and foremost to say ahead of time that what I'm sharing are my thoughts through personal experience. And I allow me to dwell most on Africa and what I know about African democracies. I would like us to acknowledge first and foremost that democracy in Africa is young. We are looking at democracies throughout the world that are 200 years and plus. And so therefore, if we acknowledge that, we will know that a lot of challenges that emerge, that appear on the continent of Africa is because it's work in progress. It's because we are moving towards perfecting our own systems of democracy. I believe truly that with time, we shall be fine. It shall be perfected. But we must first and foremost, before I dive into what I want to share, to acknowledge that some democracies in Africa are maybe just 50 years old, 20 years old. Where we are coming from, in my own lifetime, I have lived in Malawi where we didn't have any democracy of any kind in my society. The chief ruled his subjects. He died, his son became a chief. There were monarchies on the continent of Africa. The king died, his son became a king. The whole question of us now having democratically elected governments and systems is new to us. Not only that, I also am of the view that the whole question of now democracy, constitutions, and the freedom of speech, human rights, good governance are all new systems, new language that we have never known in my lifetime. So therefore, we need to pay a lot of attention. We need to invest as African nations, because now globally we have come to accept and to agree that democracy is the best way of governing. And therefore, if we are going to adopt democracy, we must invest heavily. And the world must invest heavily in our countries, in civic education, in working on mindset change, in empowering communities to take charge of themselves, in educating people. It is even difficult in our countries, in some of our countries on the continent, for people to understand that human rights is key in a democracy. But then the rights, the whole question of rights must be accompanied by responsibility. So if somebody has not been taught that now we have moved from having a chief or a king, now you're free. Now you can speak freely, you can associate freely, you can elect who you want to become your leader. But you must also know that while you do that, the other person has rights as well. So to have that responsibility, it all boils down to civic education, to prepare our nations. So I would like to say that first and foremost, we must train our communities, our societies to accept democracy, to know that that's the only way to go forward. But also we need to educate our masses. Unfortunately, in some of our countries, 80% of the people are not educated. So it is even an extra task and an extra investment.
Absolutely.
Now come to elections. There are several challenges that I find that we're preparing our nation for elections. I want to be elected as president, but then I will depend on the people, the youth, the women, to vote for me, to understand how to vote for me. Those are the ones that are being exploited in many countries because of ignorance. They don't know. Those of us who are going in for power, we want to be elected, we use the same youth to throw stones instead of building a generation of young people that will be responsible citizens to take over from us. We're turning them into fighters to fight on our behalf. So
Absolutely.
there's so much that we need to do. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, the best that can happen in any country, and I would like at this moment to congratulate Liberia, is how beautiful it is when a leader concedes, like I did, to understand that I can't proceed, I can't go on just by staying, by insisting to stay, by forcing my way in. I'm going to cause conflict and lives may be lost and the chaos may erupt. So For
Absolutely.
me,
If I could jump in and ask you a little bit more about that specifically, and I really appreciate your opening comments about how democracy is a work in progress on the African continent, and I think it's fair to say around the world. And it's important to understand too the trust and confidence that needs to be built, and also the trust in the will of the people. And so you
yeah.
bring up an incredibly important point and something I'd like to dive into with your experience in Malawi as well, in accepting the results and trusting the outcomes as part of the process to ensure credible elections. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, your experience, and how that had a profound impact in Malawi and the importance of that going forward?
Yeah, well, when we went to elections in Malawi, it was the first time a woman is becoming president. It is now when I laugh when I hear most, oh, Joyce Banda was a star performer. At that point, the economy of Malawi had grown by 6.2%, and it has never grown that much again up to today. But then I was a woman, so some issues of patriarchy and the gender came in. So when I realized the forces were coming very strong, people were saying they want a man. But then we had cast the vote. The Electoral Commission of Malawi announced that there has been fraud. So we are going to recount the votes. At that point, we are back and forth. Others are getting injunctions, others are fighting. For me, I just felt where we are heading to, there was going to be conflict in Malawi. The question I asked myself, is it worth it? Because after that, in 2019, the rigging that happened in 2019 happened in 2014 during my elections. Everybody in Malawi knows. But I had to make a decision. I can be able to save my nation inside government or outside government. There is life beyond state house. At this moment in time, I must think about Malawians first. There is no point insisting to stay. So that's exactly what I did. I just decided that I was going to announce that I'm conceding. In any case, for me, although the Electoral Commission had announced that there had been fraud, should have been a reason enough for me to challenge those elections in court. But number one, this goes for many women, and that's why I must highlight, why I must bring it about, because it is one of the questions that you are asking. It's not easy for women to mobilize the financial resources they need, even to challenge an election result, even to campaign to become a leader. It is not easy. So I looked at all that. Do I have the finances? Do I not have the support in the country? Does the international community understand what's going on in Malawi? Although the Electoral Commission has announced there has been fraud, has anybody paid attention to that? So for me, it wasn't worth it. And it was okay that I stepped aside. And I've looked back and thought I made a good decision. Because here I am in Malawi, enjoying the greatest respect from my fellow Malawians. But I'm also able to help any government that is in office in addressing issues that I love most to do in the social sector, in empowering of women and girls, and then having a president that I can relate to and talk to and share with and advise. And for that, so for me, it wasn't a problem. And that's why sometimes I wonder, when people want to prolong their stay in state house, particularly those that have stayed their maximum of 10 years, they will be struggling to want to add more time. The question I ask is, are they in the same job I was? Because for you to be an effective head of state, you went in state house for service, to serve the people, not for the power. And you will find that most women leaders go into leadership of a nation to serve. And when you go into serve, it's hard work. It takes a lot of time. And it is very exhausting and stressful. At the end of the day, you are ready to go. And you are ready to create
Absolutely.
space for somebody else to come in. So that was my experience. When I left, I wasn't pushed. I decided I could challenge it in court, and I could have challenged it successfully. I'm married to one of the finest lawyers in the land. But I decided, no, it's not worth it. I can step
Absolutely.
aside and still save my nation.
And to that point, I think underscoring the importance of that and accepting the results is absolutely critical for the democratic process. And also, it requires additional institutions and support beyond the candidates. And so one quick question for you, and I appreciate your emphasis as well about the role of women leaders. I think that cannot be underscored enough. But one quick question for you as we're running up against time is, in addition to accepting the results of a credible and verified process, what is the role of the courts as well in that process and to ensuring credible elections?
I believe that it is very, very critical for the courts, first, to earn the respect of the people, for the people to know that when our court passes a judgment, it's real and it's fair and it's genuine, based on facts. And then quick response when there are disputes, election disputes. What causes conflict is when people are delaying, they don't want to come and give judgment, they're going round and round. That can cause loss of life and conflict. But a court that is trusted by the people, a court that is quick in responding to people's queries and disputes, that is the court that we want. And I'm saying this because I happen to live in a country where I have one of the most respectable judiciaries. And you know that just a few years ago, when in 2019, the elections were nullified, because the elections after me, the same rigging took place. And the candidate went to court, and the court nullified the results. It takes a lot of courage in an African setup for a judiciary to stick their neck out to say, looking at the facts, this is what is fair, and we are going to nullify these elections. That's not easy. That's not easy. That's why Chatham House traveled to Malawi to give that judiciary of Malawi an award. But we also must applaud the judiciary of Kenya. At one time, they nullified the elections. They were not satisfied with what they were seeing, and they wanted a rerun. The rerun took place, but the same candidate won. So at least each side satisfied themselves that it was worth repeating. Now we are satisfied. This is the president that won. So the judiciary plays a very key role, and I hope they understand this, because the country very much depends on the courts to come out with judgments that will help build democracies across Africa.
Very well put. And we've unfortunately run out of time, but I do appreciate your emphasis on the accepting results, the role of the courts, and the need for greater education for everyone, because this is a work in progress. And we're looking forward to the elections this year and your continued work to make sure that they're credible and that other institutions have the support that they need. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
And now to dive into a bit more detail of some of these issues related to electoral commissions, monitoring, observation, and technology, I'd like to introduce our panel. Today, we'll be joined by Julia Brothers, Senior Advisor for Elections Programs at NDI, Nino Dolce, Executive Director of the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy, and Luis Carlos Ugalde, Director General of Integralia Consultores. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And following up on Her Excellency's comments, Julia, I'd like to dive in with you. It's clear that ensuring credible elections takes multiple stakeholders, including civil society and citizens. And you've been working across Africa and around the world, observing elections and working alongside others to ensure that elections are credible and fair. From your perspective, what is the role of civil society to ensuring free and fair elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most important role. Civil society actors are the ones that are creating transparency and building accountability around the electoral process. Organizations like the one that Nino is the director of ISFED. They're nonpartisan citizen election observers that are able to really take ownership over their own electoral processes. I mean, at NDI, we work a lot on international election observation. We conduct these international observation missions around the world, which is really more to sort of show the international community's support for elections, but also to really amplify the voices of civic organizations in that country that have way more people that they can deploy to observe at polling stations. They are on the ground for much longer than international observers, and really have much more insight and investment in the local context and what's going on. I think civil society, especially in closing spaces, is the most important actor. When you're in a situation where media is captured, where maybe the election commission is not independent and is serving the interests of the state, the actors that have real information and are speaking truth to power is civil society. So again, at NDI, we really are here to try to support and amplify those voices.
Thank you for that. You raise a few points that I'd like to dive into with you and also our other speakers today. Nino, I'd like to turn to you. Something that Julia mentioned is context matters. And it's really important to understand what the factors are and the dynamics of local communities, countries, et cetera. And from your perspective, and in Georgia, we know that the election is coming up in October, and this is going to be the first since gaining European candidacy status. And there's been tremendous and increasing engagement by civil society organizations. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the concrete examples from Georgia where civil society is really engaging and where it's having an impact?
So hello again, and I would also like to thank you for organizing this very important discussion today. And indeed, 2024 can be considered as global elections year, since we know that more than half of the world's population will be voting this year in any type of elections. And it's very important to join and unify efforts in order to safeguard electoral integrity throughout the world. And of course, as mentioned, whenever we are talking about electoral integrity, it's very much important to have different actors working together in order to tackle the problems what we see in elections. And here, whenever we say different actors, it's of course the best way when it is government, election management bodies, civil society organizations, international organizations, media, and others. And I represent civil society organization, ISFED, which is Domestic Election Observer since 1995. And our main goal has always been to look at the elections in order to enhance election integrity through monitoring pre-election, election day, and post-election period, including result tabulation and electoral disputes, and to give accurate picture to the society. Because it's very much important that on one hand, people to have the right for the genuine election, but also it's very much important that there is citizens' examination of the elections and people should be understanding. And in Georgia, it's worth to mention that civil society organizations are very strong, and we are observing election processes as well as different directions of democratic development of the country. And unfortunately, sometimes we see backsliding, including last year developments related to civil society organizations, but the candidate status which we received was, of course, a very big step for Georgian society. And now we see it as an opportunity for us to move forward. And we see 2024 elections as an opportunity for this country to move forward. But when we talk, of course, about elections, we should underline that there are, of course, some malpractices in elections and civil society organizations. And I want to stress here the observation of elections. We have solved many problems in Georgia. And it's worth mentioning that during over the years, for example, election observers solved problems like we don't have ballot stuffing anymore, or many type of election manipulations on election day, procedural wide, or family voting, or etc. So this is all based on monitoring elections, But within the time, of course, malpractices are changing. There are new and emerging challenges in elections, like huge use of administrative resources, undermining the independence of state institutions, for example, foreign information manipulation and interference, or homegrown disinformation in elections. We have AI, and we still do not know what can be impact of AI on elections. So in this, we civil society organizations are, of course, trying to look in depth and see what kind of problems we may anticipate for 2024 in order to support the electoral integrity and safeguard elections through monitoring these processes.
Great. Thank you for that. And actually, we have a few questions coming in related to technology and AI, which I'd like to get to in just a few moments. But a quick follow-up question for you, Nino, is with respect to credibility, trust, and verification, what are some of the methodologies and metrics that you're using? I know there's the PRVT, the process and results verification for transparency that's being applied. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because I think that is one of the key concerns out there is with monitoring, how can you ensure that it's standardized and that it's credible and that those processes are actually going to be transparent?
Yes, sure. So when we are talking about citizens observation, also it's very much important that those election groups who are monitoring elections, they should have very good methodology, and also they should follow ethical obligations concerning impartiality, independence, accuracy, transparency, etc. And when we are talking about accuracy, of course, methodology is very much important in order to provide accurate, valuable, and precise findings to the public. And this Fed has developed its own methodology, which is well known worldwide, to present the most accurate picture of elections. And it is, as said, pre-election, election day, and post-election observation, including on election day PRVT methodology, which is process and result verification for transparency. And this methodology provides systemic information on the conduct of voting and counting, and independently and impartially assess the accuracy of the official results announced by the Election Commission. And it also allows for conducting both quantitative as well as qualitative assessment of elections. And based on the representative random sample of polling stations, it gives a chance to generalize the findings and present nationwide picture. And that's why this methodology is very much important, because it is showing not only the problems what we see during elections, but it is showing the scale of the fraud, if there is, and also influence over the result. Hence, it is supporting the trust of our elections, or if we see lots of manipulation, of course, then not. So this PRVT methodology really gives opportunity to look the scale of the manipulation. If it's not big, then you trust the results. And of course, if it's big, then you do not. So this is the methodology we are using. And I think it's the best way to show that accuracy and accurate picture of elections.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And on the issue of credibility and trust, I'd like to turn to you, Luis Carlos, regarding electoral commissions and hear from you both from your experience and your perspective in Mexico. I've heard from some that Mexico is considered the gold standard in terms of electoral commissions. And I'm curious about your perspective in the role of electoral commissions and how to ensure their credibility and their independence, going back to Julia's comments a few moments ago, and their role to also engender trust in the public.
Well, yes, the role of the Elections Institute in Mexico over the past 30 years has been very relevant in building confidence. However, over the past few years, the Elections Institute has been under a direct attack from the President of the Republic and the administration in general. So though the Electoral Commission in Mexico continues to be popular and has a confidence of about 60%, it is fair to say that it has been weakening given the fact that the President of the Republic, the one that won the election organized by this institute a few years ago, now is attacking it and wants to change the nature, wants to make it less independent, and that is one of the threats to Mexican democracy in recent years. But yes, electoral commissions are a key element of building confidence, keeping confidence in today's world. And the problem that I see is that in Mexico and in different countries, the public in general is losing interest in keeping democracies afloat. There is a recent poll published by the Pew Research Center, which says that in Mexico, we have now about half the population that would support an autocrat if that means that this autocrat can bring security to the people. That number, that figure was 27% a few years ago. So the fact that the people in general are less enthusiastic about democracy, I would say that simply weakens the role of these electoral commissions and civic organizations in keeping democracy afloat.
Thank you for that. And one of the questions I have is, how do you really focus on strengthening that? And you followed up a bit with those ideas and some of the issues that are undermining the Electoral Commission's strength and potentially integrity over time and making it more susceptible to pressure. And it actually dovetails with a question that we received from our audience, which is from John Bouvier from Montreal. And he's asking, what are the challenges and opportunities to foster civic education, whether by leveraging social media or otherwise? And we'll dive in more to technology in a bit. But I'm curious from your perspective, as younger generations and others are losing interest, what are some strategies that can have impact and combat that?
Well, younger generations are less interested in politics and democracy than older generations. That is a challenge. In Mexico, to give you an example, voters from 19 to 20 years old have a turnout rate of about 30%. So it is very low. And I don't see any reason for that to change. Can civic education change that? I don't think that would be very effective, because these younger generations don't see democracy as something useful to them. They don't see that politicians, the government, democracy has an impact on their daily lives. The digital economy and social media and the immediate way they see life don't make democracy look relevant to them. So what can you do to that? I would say that social media has a responsibility on bringing democracy to their daily attention. I would say that Twitter and TikTok and other of these type of social media institutions should take care of this. And you organizations like NDI, Foreign Policy, and other institutions worldwide should make some sort of agreements with them to bring that education to them. I don't see any other means to do that. I don't see universities or traditional media being effective at doing this.
It's a really important point. And especially with social media platforms, there is a key role to be had and for those organizations to play. But also, as you all know, the trends are across many of those organizations and social networks and social platforms, content moderation is diminishing either by way of choice by the leadership of those organizations or by way of layoffs and those who have been employed to moderate content and make sure that there's, trustworthy, validated, fact-based information out there is diminishing. And so I think those are very complex challenges that need to be addressed. And when we think about that, Julia, back to you and the role of communications technologies, AI, and others, how are you seeing them play a role in elections, both positively and negatively, and ways to potentially leverage them for greater engagement, but also fact-based communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we generally speaking, right, this has just really kind of complicated a little bit the sort of electoral landscape, right, by the use of both social media in terms of campaigning, in terms of the information environment, but also the use of technology in elections, right? Whether we're talking about, biometric voter registration or ballot counting machines. And so there are a lot of more sort of actors we have to consider now in terms of third-party technology vendors, right? What's that process for procuring election equipment? Is it transparent? Is it inclusive? Is equipment sort of auditable? Can it meet, standards for open election data? These kinds of questions. Is it observable? Are observers invited to be a part of the certification process and testing? But then also this role of the social media platforms. I mean, the fact that there are political ads that are run on these platforms really means that they are very much directly involved in the electoral process and need to also meet those transparency requirements when it comes to political and campaign finance. I think, as Nino mentioned, we're sort of always evolving our monitoring methodologies to meet new and emerging threats. And one of those is really the information environment and the way that the information environment impacts electoral integrity. We know that things like disinformation and information disorder, can create unfair advantages or disadvantages for candidates, can potentially increase potentials for election-related violence, can really play on social cleavages, and erode confidence in democratic institutions. We've seen election commissions, observation organizations, and others very much sort of as targets of election-related disinformation campaigns. So, it's something that we are monitoring. We all now kind of engage in social media monitoring around elections. When it comes to AI in particular, I know that that is a big concern. I think we want to make sure that we sort of don't overwhelm people when we start talking about the AI kind of an elections panic. I think we need to sort of be very deliberate when we're talking about the risks. Some of this is, very, very specifically related to voter information. Are there, especially when we're talking about generative AI, right? Like, what sort of tools are delivering practical information to voters, like chatbots or other services, in terms of where to vote, who's on my ballot, what do I need in order to vote? So, we need to make sure that that information is actually coming from authoritative sources. The bigger challenge, of course, that is the generative AI sort of manipulating the information space in the election environment through fake videos, voice recordings, things like that. And in some ways, the interventions there are not terribly different from how we've been trying to confront the proliferation of disinformation more broadly, right? In terms of greater media and digital literacy, fact-checking, pressuring tech companies to take a more proactive role in supporting a healthy information space around elections, pushing for transparency in content, and holding political actors accountable that are engaging or benefiting from these manipulative tactics. So in some ways, it's sort of the same problem, just kind of a little more challenging because generative AI is inherently a little more opaque, which means it's harder to identify and harder to build accountability. But I think to Luis Carlos's point, I mean, a lot of election management bodies do have agreements with social media platforms to push out credible voter information, right? And that is something that, we've seen, and I think it makes a ton of sense. And I definitely agree with him that you have to meet the voters where they are. You have to give them the information where they are. I mean, thinking like in the US, like nobody knows to go to their Secretary of State's website, right, to get information about voting. Nobody knows who's in charge of their elections. And you really have to meet citizens where they are and where they're getting their information to have really effective voter education.
Thank you for that. I think you covered a lot, and absolutely. And we're already seeing in the Indonesia elections, for example, AI played a big role in terms of the campaign, and we're seeing that manifest by candidates and others. And so it is something that's already having an impact, and engaging with it and identifying ways to really assess what is real, what is fact-based, and how to verify that will continue to be incredibly important and will take public sector, private collaboration as well to do it. I'd like to name check a few of the audience members who have come in, and Julia, actually you addressed some of the questions. Anne Bailey Danhofer from Arlington, as well as Rogers Bro from Uganda, really curious about that question, how AI is going to have impacts in elections going forward, but also the hardware, asking questions about how can we be confident in voting machines and computers that are used during elections, and to make sure that our critical infrastructure is secure against cyber and other attacks and those sorts of things. And so ongoing monitoring, and again, public, private, and civil society cooperation is absolutely key. Nino, I'd like to turn back to you and ask you, having heard some of those comments, what is front of mind for you as you're thinking about the road ahead to the October elections in Georgia, and just more broadly, the planning process matters, right? It's not just what happens on election day, and it's the road to those elections and everything that happens between now and then. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of those key factors that are creating an enabling environment, right, for more robust elections that can be verified, in addition to the PRVT process that you talked about before? What are some of the other factors that are front of mind for you?
Yes, Alison, thank you for this question. And also, I would like to mention that what Julia was saying at Luis Carlos about voter information and voter education. This is something which is very much important for making elections better in general, for free and fair elections, because the non-democratic actors usually, they are using ignorance or illiteracy of people about electoral processes. So it's very much important whenever people are knowledgeable about their rights, about duties and responsibilities. So when we are talking about AI, or then we are talking also about electronic technologies in elections, for example, which many countries are using right now, and Georgia also is moving to electronic technologies, and it will be first time in Georgia for the full scale where we will conduct elections through electoral technologies. It's very much important to ensure that all electoral principles are met, whether it's vote secrecy, whether it's genuine elections, whether it's accessible for everybody, and also voter information campaigns, as I said. And also, it's very much important that recently elections are not only election day or official, for example, pre-election campaign whenever elections are announced. But we have seen that election has gone beyond, and it's all election cycles. Whenever one election ends, another elections are already starting. So when we are looking forward, it's very important that we are monitoring the space even now today before we go to pre-election period, and we are looking how people are approached if there is use of administrative resources or electorally motivated infrastructural or social programs, or if there is any intimidation or pressure on voters in order to ensure that people vote freely. So for us, and I think for many countries, elections has become the whole year observation thing where we are looking at the processing during all time in order to safeguard elections. And as said, we are using many new methods in order to increase voter education in general. And social networks, of course, play a crucial role. And we have to ensure the balance. On one hand, to use social networks in order to spread information about elections, but on the other hand, to really think how to ensure that people are receiving true information, that they are not under the disinformation or propaganda campaigns. So election observers have also widened their scope of work, and we now have to look through all these directions. And one more thing I just want, and I will end here, also very much important when we are talking about elections and election integrity. In general, we see worldwide there is a backsliding and shrinking space for civil society organizations, especially for election observers. And this is one very threatening trend, I would say, because for non-democratic actors, the integrity of election or independent and objective assessment of electoral processes poses a threat. So that's why we see different type of discreditation, whether it's verbal attacks or legislative initiatives such as foreign agent law. So I think it's very much important that all stakeholders who want to support free and fair elections to stand together in order to enhance public confidence in elections in 2024 or beyond.
Thank you for that. You went actually exactly where I wanted to go. When we're talking about greater engagement and civic engagement in elections, the election process, in addition to civil society organizations, citizen observers are so incredibly important. And that is true everywhere around the world. And what is also unfortunately true is we're witnessing increasing intimidation, pressure, in some cases, violence against those observers. And so in light of that, and in light of the fact that the UN has now recognized citizen observers as human rights defenders, what can we do to more effectively protect those observers in environments everywhere, in areas of conflict, but also in those in what are considered relatively stable democracies where that level of intimidation is intensifying? Luis Carlos, I'd like to turn that over to you.
Well, that is very relevant, but it is difficult to achieve. Let me give you an example that applies to Mexico today. Tomorrow, the presidential campaigns begin in Mexico, and this is going to be the most violent election process in Mexico in recent history because of criminal groups interfering, killing candidates, intimidating the public, making violence. And how can you protect observers from those criminal groups? I mean, nobody wants to go into those territories in which there are some of these groups working, intimidating people. And therefore, in the case of Mexico, in these years, of course, criminal groups become one of the threats to free voting and free elections. It is not only the administration or governments that somehow try to bias the electoral process in favor of some candidates, but it is increasingly the role of criminal groups in the case of Mexico. So how can you deal with that? How can you ask observers to go into those territories? How can you ask them to do that? So I would say that the observation faces those challenges. And on the second hand, most observation still occurs on election day and alone on election day. And that is useless because most of the problems that occur during the process, electoral campaigns and electoral processes, which make unfair and illiberal democracies operate in real terms, happen much before election day. So I would say that on a second aspect is that we have to enhance observers to come to countries much before election day. For example, today in Mexico, there have happened so many aspects, so many violations to the electoral rules that we already have problems even before campaigns begin. So I would ask that to be one of the challenges to promote election observation much before election day.
Thank you for that. And we'll need to move on in just a few moments to our closing segment. But I'd just like to ask each of you, when you're thinking about these challenges and you lay them out very clearly, what are the priority actions that need to be taken now? If you were to say one or two things, each of you, that you really want to emphasize about what must be done to ensure election integrity, credibility, going forward, what are those key priorities that you'd like our audience to understand today? Luis Carlos, I'll go to you then.
Yes, I could suggest two aspects. The first one I just mentioned is that we need to increase the role of social media in bringing democracy to the attention of young generations in an easy way to understand what this is relevant to their lives, even if they don't perceive that. We need to increase that role very effectively and very soon. And we need to make the social media organizations and companies to do more in fighting misinformation and fake news. That is one. And the second that I want to just propose is that we need to fight the most eroding and most dangerous aspect in the future of democracy, which is the lack of attention and the lack of interest in the general public regarding democracy. Democratic values are eroding worldwide. Populism is part of the reason, but in general, the public feels that democracy is very far away, and they prefer effective governments than democratic governments. So this lack of a linkage between why democracies could make governments more effective, we need to rebuild that connection, because if that connection doesn't exist, then democracy is going to erode in the coming years.
Thank you for that call to action. Julia, briefly, what are your priorities? And then over to you, Nino.
I think that I think, one of the biggest issues we're seeing is this sort of erosion of confidence in democratic institutions and the democratic process. And this is a space where observation is key to that. We've seen how election observation can help promote the role of election commissions, can help build confidence and trust in election results, especially in the face of sort of increasing results denialism from losing parties or losing candidates. And so I think all we can do is really support and create space for election observers to be able to execute their jobs. Like Nino said, we're seeing globally, both international and citizen observers are facing increasing harassment, heightened legal restrictions, and risks of violence. And it's really important that we just kind of stand with civil society and continue to speak truth to power and protect those rights.
Thank you, Julia. Nino?
So I couldn't agree more than whatever my colleagues already mentioned. First, of course, in my mind was that increasing nihilism towards elections in general and lower turnout within societies, especially with the youth, it's one of the big problems. And so we have to solve that with different educational campaigns, including how one vote matters and how citizens can change lives of their countries in future through democratic processes, which is elections, and rise of the populace, which is problem, and not issue-based politics from political parties. This is big problem. And second big problem is also, of course, foreign information manipulation and interference in elections, what we see, whether it's coming from the different countries, including in my part of the world where we have Russian disinformation a lot, but also homegrown disinformation, which is not giving opportunity to people to make free choices. So this is also a big problem, and we together should work with the social media platforms or other companies to somehow ensure that they are also following the importance of elections and they have enough regulations to ensure that their platforms are not used for the disinformation. And the last one, of course, is observation methodologies, that we all should update methodologies, whether it's domestic actors or internationals, in order to very accurately see the problems there are, because there are new and emerging problems. Methodologies still need to be updated in order to see the clear picture how elections are conducted in the country.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for your concrete examples, your recommendations, and also to all of you for your ongoing work. Julia Brothers, Nino Dolice, and Luis Carlos Ugalde, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and best of luck in the year ahead.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you
very much.
And now I'd like to move to our closing segment, and I am thrilled to welcome Ambassador Johnny Carson, who is an NDI board member of 37 years, for some reflections and also some closing thoughts and recommendations of how we can take what we're learning today, the partnerships that are emerging, to really have an impact going forward to ensure electoral integrity and fair elections going forward. Ambassador, welcome.
Allison, thank you very, very much. We've just heard an enormously stimulating discussion on the issues surrounding the importance of democracy, the importance of citizen participation, the importance of civil society, importance of making democracy meaningful for citizens. in countries around the world.
So thinking about what you've heard today and also the work from your career, from your perspective, what are some of those key enabling factors and what are the core components that are absolutely necessary to ensure credible elections?
I think the first thing that is absolutely clear is that there must be citizen engagement and citizen participation. Civil society is the bedrock of democracy in every democratic nation. So the rights of citizens to be able to organize and to participate freely, fairly, without harassment and intimidation are absolutely key. I think support for civil society organizations and institutions are critical as well. Independent election commissions, as Luis has pointed out, are also very, very important. They must be seen to be institutions of integrity, credibility, and independence. Citizens must believe in their work and in their impartiality. It's also critically important to have citizen observation of elections. Civil society groups should be able to observe elections in their countries, not just on election day, but on the run-up to elections as well, to ensure that voter registrations are open and fair and transparent, that there is no impartiality in the selection or exclusion of candidates from the ballot, that the government is not playing an unduly heavy role in influencing any particular outcome to any election. And there should be international observation as well. No democracy which calls itself a democracy should be afraid of not only its citizen scrutiny of the process, but its international scrutiny of the process as well. When societies turn their backs on local observation and international observation, it's a sure sign that they have something to hide. It's also important that laws are on the books to protect the rights of citizens. We must be mindful to ensure that governments don't restrict the activities of NGOs or institutions. And they should not be restricting the rights of the media, which plays a critically important role as well in being able to observe, comment, criticize, and praise if that is necessary. Strengthening of institutions like the courts are extraordinarily important. I think President Banda pointed out very clearly the role that some African courts have played in recent years in helping to increase the integrity of the process in Kenya, in Malawi, in her country, and most recently in Senegal, when the Supreme Court ruled against the president who was attempting to change the presidential elections and extend himself in office. So it's important that these institutions are made to work. But increasingly, we also have to be concerned about the role of AI and social media. It cuts both ways. Social media and AI can be extraordinarily valuable in educating citizens, informing them of their rights, where they can vote, and what the rules and regulations and norms around elections are. They can help in voter registration and in pointing out polling places and other information. But we know these institutions can also be enormously destructive, providing misinformation, false information, fake facts, and undermining processes. So it's important to be able to look at these and make sure that they are doing the right thing. But it's also important, finally, that government leaders, citizens who are at the top, who are in positions of political influence and power, respect the democracies that they live in. they must play their role along with the civil society groups who are the everyday participants. Elections are important. Democracy is even more important.
You laid that out very clearly, and thank you for articulating those components. We're up against the hour and about out of time, but I would love to end with a question from our audience member that actually brings us up to the top, and some of the comments that Her Excellency made. And this comes from Moussa Doumbia from Senegal, who works with a local development agency there, who says that he totally agrees with Dr. Banda and the African democracy is young, and this is all a work in progress for all of us. But one of the major problems, he notes, is that the lack of quality education for young people and women who are often victims of conflict. And so the question is, what tools does NDI have at its disposal to support African youth in the objectives of democracy?
The National Democratic Institute focuses in particular on two demographics. One is young women, and the other is youth. Across Africa, we know that societies that exclude their women from political participation and full participation in economic life are societies that are failing to use 51% of their capacity to move ahead. We also know that Africa is the youngest and fastest growing continent in the world in terms of population, and it's extraordinarily important that both women and youth be included in everything that we think about and do at the National Democratic Institute. They are priorities for us. They are the future of democracy. It is Africa's youth and Africa's women who are going to lead the way.
Very well put. Thank you. Thank you for your partnership and for the work that you're doing and for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our speakers. This has been an incredibly important and timely conversation. We've highlighted the complexities of the issues, certainly, that are facing electoral integrity around the world, as well as the importance of civil society, election observers, electoral commissions, and the methods that are being implemented to ensure democratic processes around the world, including the sovereignty and protection of citizens. Thank you again to NDI for supporting today's event and helping to bring this really important topic to you and to our audience around the world. If you missed the first two parts of this series, you can go back and watch those recordings on our website. And there's more on this topic as well. If you're subscribers, please check out our website. We have incredible content on all of these issues there. The last issue from our editorial team is focused on the 2024 elections. And so there's a tremendous amount of rich content there. And I welcome all of you to go to foreignpolicy.com to learn more. So, of course, we'll continue to cover these topics in our journalism, in our events, and welcome you to stay part of this community and this conversation. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.